What looked like a simple photograph at a high society gala was actually a devastating metaphor for the collapse of an empire. When tennis legend Serena Williams smiled for the cameras alongside the very figures who have quietly distanced themselves from Meghan Markle, the internet barely noticed. But in the ruthless, hyper-calculated world of Hollywood public relations, a picture is never just a picture. It was a subtle surgical message. In less than 6 years, the most highly publicized social circle in modern history has evaporated. This is the story of how the ultimate Hollywood coup turned into a masterclass in commercial desperation, and how the A-list quietly, efficiently, and permanently erased the Duke and Duchess of Sussex from their orbit. By the end of this analysis, you will understand exactly what happened behind the locked doors of Montecito and the gated estates of Beverly Hills. We will unpack the subtle social media signals that carry devastating deeper meanings, the moral contradiction that fractured their most valuable alliances, and why the current silence from former allies is not an accident, but a coordinated corporate strategy. This is not about gossip, this is a forensic look at the weaponization of victimhood, the illusion of power, and what happens when the currency of proximity runs completely dry. To truly comprehend the sheer scale of this social collapse, we must first step back to a time when they held the absolute center of the cultural universe. May of 2018, St. George Chapel. The air was thick with the kind of historic privilege and untouchable prestige that money simply cannot buy. On that day, the guest list was a staggering fusion of ancient royal bloodlines and modern American royalty. Oprah Winfrey George, and Emil Clooney David, and Victoria Beckham, and Serena Williams all sat in the pews. For the Hollywood elite, attending a British royal wedding is the ultimate status symbol. It was an unparalleled display of soft power. The couple possessed the one thing billionaires and megastars crave but cannot manufacture on their own, which is direct, undisputed proximity to the British crown. During this golden era, they were untouchable. They were perceived as the progressive modern face of a 1,000-year-old institution. But the foundation of that day contained a fatal flaw, one that would only become visible years later. Many of those A-list guests had never actually met the bride before receiving their gold-embossed invitations. The invitations were not born of lifelong friendships, but of strategic brand alignment. When the couple dramatically exited royal duties and relocated to California, they fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the power they wielded. They operated under the assumption that the Hollywood elite were drawn to them as individuals, to their personal brand and their humanitarian ideals. The dark, unspoken truth of the Los Angeles power structure is far more cynical. Hollywood does not do unconditional friendship. Hollywood does transactions. Every dinner party, every shared private jet, every public endorsement is a carefully weighed investment designed to enhance a personal brand. When the Sussexes severed their ties with the palace, they willingly surrendered their most valuable asset. The initial transition to American life was heavily subsidized by the very elite who attended their wedding. They relied on a sprawling network of billionaire goodwill. There were private jets offered by the Clooneys, sprawling estates loaned by media moguls, and luxury accommodations quietly covered by wealthy friends. But what was initially framed as temporary support for a couple fleeing a toxic institution soon revealed a staggering sense of entitlement. Industry insiders began to whisper about an uncomfortable dynamic. The couple allegedly expected these immense luxuries not as favors, but as their rightful due. They operated with the belief that their mere presence was a privilege worthy of endless resources. As lucrative media deals began to stall and the promised avalanche of content failed to materialize, the commercial desperation became impossible to hide. The heavy polished armor of their PR machine began to crack, exposing a profound moral contradiction. They demanded absolute privacy while simultaneously monetizing their family trauma for the highest bidder. The contrast between their polished victimhood and their staggering privilege began to alienate the very people they sought to impress. The first major rupture occurred with figures who actually understood the unforgiving nature of legacy and loyalty. David and Victoria Beckham, who had been fiercely supportive during the early days, quietly initiated a total withdrawal. When rumors circulated that the Beckhams were leaking stories to the press, a suggestion that reportedly left David absolutely furious the line was drawn, the Beckhams did not retaliate with an undignified public statement. They retaliated with absolute silence and a definitive shift in allegiance. David Beckham was recently seen warmly engaging with King Charles and Prince William, making his loyalties abundantly clear. He chose the quiet dignity of the institution over the chaotic noise of Montecito. Soon after, the Clooneys followed suit. Despite funding luxury travel in the early days, George and Emil Clooney entirely removed the Sussexes from their philanthropic orbit. The couple was noticeably absent from the Clooney's highly publicized Albie Awards, a staggering snub for a duo who heavily promote themselves as global humanitarians. This exclusion was not an oversight. In the upper echelons of global philanthropy, who you invite to your table is a direct endorsement of their character. The absence of an invitation was a devastatingly clear message that their brand was no longer aligned with serious, uncontroversial humanitarian work. Even those considered genuinely kind within the notoriously ruthless entertainment industry made their calculated exits. Idris Elba, who famously served as the DJ at their royal wedding, made his choice not through words but through action. He partnered directly with the King's Trust, aligning his personal brand with the reigning monarch. In Hollywood, who you refuse to stand next to is just as important as who you stand with. Agents and publicists across the city began to realize that associating with the Sussexes was no longer a golden ticket. It was a liability. Being photographed with them or linked to their endless stream of grievances actively weakened a celebrity's box office potential and commercial appeal. The industry recognized that to align with them was to invite the immense, unseen pressure of crossing the British royal family, a risk virtually no A-lister was willing to take for a couple whose own media empire was rapidly losing relevance. The visual evidence of this isolation has become increasingly brutal to witness. While the working royals command packed historic venues with effortless gravity, recent solo appearances by the Duchess in international arenas have been marked by starkly empty spaces and a lack of elite presence. These untouched glasses at VIP tables and unbothered bystanders are not just unfortunate optics. They are the physical manifestation of a collapsed social currency. But the most devastating psychological truth lies in the relationship with the woman who orchestrated their most explosive public moment. Oprah Winfrey, the ultimate architect of the American media landscape, has seemingly maintained a polite distance, but high-level media executives note that this is not a friendship. It is an insurance policy. Oprah is engaging in a practice known as long-arming. She is keeping the couple just close enough to ensure that if a massive, earth-shattering event occurs, she retains exclusive access. She is not waiting to hear about their new lifestyle brands or philanthropic endeavors. She is waiting for the three ultimate commodities of reality television: divorce, death, or unprecedented drama. The realization that their most powerful ally views them merely as a dormant volcano of tragedy is deeply chilling. They traded the unconditional security of a historic monarchy for a transactional town that measures their worth entirely by the damage they can inflict on their own family. But this total social isolation was merely the prelude to a much darker realization. As the elite doors of Hollywood slammed shut one by one, a profound psychological shift was happening back in London. A silent, coordinated retaliation from the palace was about to unfold, one that would expose the true cost of their ultimate betrayal and push a deeply fractured marriage to the absolute breaking point. The ultimate retaliation of the British monarchy was not a counterattack. It was total freezing indifference. For years, the Duke and Duchess operated under the strategic assumption that every public grievance they aired would force a reaction from London, keeping them locked in a highly profitable high-stakes dance of global public relations. But the palace, guided by the quiet ruthlessness of King Charles and Prince William, executed the most devastating crisis management strategy imaginable. They simply moved on. By refusing to engage, by closing ranks, and focusing entirely on duty, the monarchy starved the Montecito narrative of its essential fuel. There were no more statements of regret. There were no peace summits. There was only a deafening transatlantic silence. And in the hyper-competitive ecosystem of modern media, being attacked is a business model. Being ignored is a death sentence. This profound external vacuum immediately created an agonizing internal pressure. Without the unifying force of a shared enemy, the structural cracks within their isolated existence began to show. The psychological toll of severing ties with an institution that defines your very identity is staggering. But it is deeply asymmetrical. For the Duchess, the royal exit was a return to her native environment, a chance to conquer the Hollywood hierarchy with the ultimate trump card. But for the Duke, it was the systematic dismantling of the only reality he had ever known. Sources adjacent to their inner circle suggest a quiet, pervasive tension behind the gates of their estate. It is the inescapable reality of a man who traded a 1,000-year blood right for a corporate boardroom, only to discover that the boardroom views him not as a leader, but as a diminishing asset. The permanent rifts with his father and brother are no longer abstract plot points for a memoir. They are the cold, unforgiving reality of a man isolated in a foreign country, surrounded by a transient network of fixers, managers, and publicists who are paid to agree with him. The public interpretation of their reinvention has shifted dramatically from initial sympathy to a chilling collective apathy. Nowhere is this more devastatingly apparent than in the launch of the Duchess's much-anticipated lifestyle brand. What was supposed to be the triumphant unveiling of a billion-dollar empire was reduced to the awkward distribution of numbered jars of jam to secondary influencers. The subtle social media signals surrounding this launch carried a brutal truth. The true A-list did not post. The megastars who once filled the pews at St. George's Chapel were completely absent from the promotional push. It was a visual humiliation that exposed the hollow core of their commercial strategy. They had fundamentally overestimated their individual market value. They believed the global public was fascinated by their domestic taste when, in reality, the public was only ever fascinated by their friction with the crown. When you strip away the tiaras, the castles, and the institutional prestige, what remains is an offering indistinguishable from 1,000 other celebrity vanity projects. This commercial desperation is now subtly bleeding into the few remaining strongholds of their legacy. The Invictus Games, once the undisputed crown jewel of the Duke's philanthropic life, has become a complex arena of moral contradiction. What was designed to be a solemn, dignified tribute to wounded veterans has increasingly felt like a heavily curated backdrop for high-end fashion and personal branding. The tension here is palpable. Viewers notice the subtle shifts. They notice when the focus pivots from the raw, human stories of the athletes to the highly produced arrivals of the founders. It creates a quiet outrage among traditional supporters, leading to the departure of key executives and an uncomfortable feeling that a noble cause is being leveraged to sustain a sinking public image. This is not just a PR misstep, it is the weaponization of a charitable platform to mask an undeniable social decline. Why does this story resonate so deeply long after the initial shock value has faded? It is because it serves as a modern tragedy about the illusion of control and the terrifying cost of hubris. It is a cautionary tale that transcends celebrity gossip, touching on universal human fears about family estrangement, the limits of loyalty, and the devastating realization that you have burned bridges you cannot rebuild. We watch not out of sheer malice, but because we are witnessing the live, forensic dismantling of a social experiment. We are watching what happens when two people demand all the privileges of global royalty while simultaneously rejecting every duty required to earn it. They demanded a life of absolute autonomy, and the world has granted it to them by leaving them completely alone. Looking forward, the trajectory appears set. There will likely be no dramatic, catastrophic implosion. Instead, there will be a slow, steady, and irreversible fade into irrelevance. The contracts will quietly expire. The remaining high-profile alliances will slowly drift into polite obscurity. The cameras will still flash occasionally, but the underlying power that once made those flashes matter has been completely extinguished. They will be left residing in their sprawling estate surrounded by the physical trappings of immense wealth, yet entirely bankrupt of the social currency they sacrificed everything to obtain. What looked like the ultimate victory over an archaic institution was in fact the blueprint for their own exile. If you found this deep dive into the psychology and strategy of this cultural shift insightful, please subscribe to the channel and leave your thoughts below. We will continue to analyze the hidden mechanics of power, influence, and the stories behind the headlines.